Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of universal. Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of universal.
50, and we'll get into some entrepreneurial ideas for those over 50. So for those of you out there who listen to this show because you are transitioning your career or growing your business or trying to earn more money and find more financial prosperity, this is going to be a great show for you today. So with that said, I am going to tell you a little more about John. So John Tarnoff is a reinvention career coach, speaker, and author who helps late career professionals transition to meaningful and sustainable careers beyond traditional retirement. Fired 39% of the time over his 35-year career as a Los Angeles-based film producer, studio executive, and tech entrepreneur, he reinvented himself at age 50, launching a career focused on professional development, education, and training. A strategic, future-focused communicator and connector of people and ideas, John has held 18 positions over his career as talent agent, studio executive, film and video game producer, project manager, and program developer. His reinvention curriculum is a natural outgrowth of his own journey of self-discovery. John's career hit a wall at age 50. He went back to school, earned a master's degree, and reinvented a new direction for himself in entertainment, where he was hired to serve as head of show development for DreamWorks Animation from 2003 to 2009. In this new role, he developed culture-changing creative leadership training and college recruiting programs that helped the company earn a place on both Forbes and Fortune's 100 Best Places to Work lists. Since 2010, he has been committed full-time to education and training, serving as a graduate-level professor and head of industry relations for Carnegie Mellon University's Los Angeles-based Master of Entertainment Industry Management program. In 2014, he launched his Boomer Reinvention career coaching program to support older workers in prolonging their careers past traditional retirement and addressing the entrepreneurial challenges and opportunities of the digital age. He's the author of the Amazon bestseller Boomer Reinvention, How to Create Your Dream Career Over 50. And in 2017, he was named a top influencer in aging by PBS Next Avenue. John also holds a master's in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica and another bachelor's degree from Amherst College. So, John, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Good. So there is a lot to talk about. We've spoken a couple of times now, and every conversation leads to a lot of different things. So we'll see if I can rein it in here and keep it.
Hold it all in within an hour.
I know, because we could go a lot of places with this. It's really fascinating to think about the changes in the work world today, and it's changing really rapidly. People are obviously living longer, wanting to work longer for a number of reasons. Some are truly wants and some are not, but for whatever the reason is, there are people out there who want to continue working into their later years.
Right.
Hopefully it's because they love what they do and they just don't want to stop. But that's...
Well, I think one of the things on that is that when you talk about people living longer, the stats are that if you reach 65 today, you have at least a 20% chance of living past 90.
Wow.
Right? And every year, this is Census Bureau, and every year over 65 increases your chances of living past 90. So if you're approaching 60 and you're kind of getting this sense of, oh my goodness, I should be retiring, or people are trying to tell me that I should be retiring, do you want to spend 30 years in retirement? I mean, that's a third of your life, potentially. So I think the demographics and the longevity issue that we're facing is really seriously upsetting the traditional mindset around retirement and career and what our lives are supposed to be about.
Right. That's a fascinating statistic, actually. I didn't know that. So I do know in the old days that people used to wait for retirement and often not live very far past retirement.
Right.
So that was kind of a tragic
scenario. Retirement was originally set up in the late 19th century in Germany as a way of kind of humanely transitioning factory workers, out of the factory and back home waiting to die. Right? I mean, that's the antecedent of what we're facing now. And of course it then evolved into this 1950s, 1960s Sun City, happy infantile oldsters, playing canasta and golf and going on cruises.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this generation, certainly, or the generations that are coming behind us, are particularly interested in that kind of sedentary, disengaged lifestyle.
Right. And, the beautiful thing now, too, and we'll get on to some of what we were really supposed to talk about, but you're making me think. It's so wonderful, too, if you've had a career that maybe you haven't loved that much, that you can have a whole next chapter now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is the time to really go for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's a really good point, because I think a lot of people are really dreading confronting this problem or issue or opportunity because they feel like, oh, I'm just limited by everything that I've done up to now.
Right.
And my skills aren't portable, which is a misperception to begin with. And I think so people say, well, what am I going to do? Right. And there is so much that you can do.
Yeah, and that's really the main point of today's show, is to open your mind. John talks a lot about mindset, as do I, and so really shifting the whole perspective on what it all means to work and to retire or not retire. I mean, it's great to just rethink the whole thing. So why don't you tell us a little about how you even got to this point?
Sure. So as you said in the introduction, I've been fired 39% of the time in my career, and that's kind of par for the course in Hollywood, right? It's a very volatile business. But one of the things that I realized coming out of that field, and always feeling like, in my Hollywood career, that since it is very much of a youth-focused industry, that I did want to transition ultimately into an education-based career, partially because I kind of always took people up on opportunities to come and talk to classes, and I was always very interested in kind of the meta behind what I did day to day in my work.
Right.
So that was always kind of where I was going with it. And then
can I ask you to just back up a minute, because I actually did skip a little bit of your Hollywood career, so maybe you can fill us in a little on some.
Sure. So most of that career was working as a studio executive and a film producer here in Los Angeles for studios and independent companies, and ending up, as you mentioned, with DreamWorks Animation in the 2000s. And that was really, well, and I also had this kind of sabbatical in technology in the 90s, and I had a startup and raised money and, kind of rode that up and then rode that down after the bubble burst in 2001, which was the wall, really, that I hit when my startup fell apart. And I had been fired before, at that point, so I knew what it was like to recover from a job loss and try to turn the setback into a success, but I really didn't want to go back to the same kinds of work that I had done previously. So that's why I went back to school. I went back to get this psychology degree because I thought, well, I don't know that I want to become a psychologist per se, but I wanted to learn more about myself. I wanted to learn more about people and how to interact with people. And I thought maybe there's something that I could do better in my interactions that would help me figure out this next career. And the DreamWorks thing came out of that. And interestingly, it was because I was talking about things differently in my interviews.
I love that. Okay.
So I think that is kind of something to think about when you're making a transition. I think at any time in life, but particularly later down the road, is to really update your sense of who you are, what you're interested in, where you could be going, and look at the opportunity for where you can make a particularly specific contribution to the people that you're talking to, right? And that was why that came together with me at DreamWorks, and it ended up being a role that was very different from any of the roles that I had had previously. Some of that was just timing, right? It was advantageous for them to think expansively, and we kind of together explored these new areas
Okay.
For the years that I was there.
Okay. All right. Yeah, wonderful. And so when you go back to how you were talking or speaking differently about yourself, can you give us a little example of what that was?
Sure. I mean, I was always drawn to the business because I was interested in stories and why one story works and doesn't work, and why this project goes and that project doesn't go.
Right.
And it was very much about the content. And what I got out of my psychology work, and perhaps this is also a function of what happens to you when you get older, which is you start to become more interested in different aspects of meaning and purpose. I found that I was becoming more interested in the people behind it, right?
Okay.
So it was not so much the stories and the projects and the logistics of that. It was what makes the people tick who are behind it, and how can I help encourage that process?
Okay. Okay.
And the synergy, synchronicity of that working in an animation company, which is all about art and technology and a large group of people coming together to solve those kinds of creative and technical problems. I mean, I was like a kid in the candy store. I was working with the most amazingly talented people who were encountering lots of questions about their own career development and where they fit in and how they could make a contribution to a common creative goal, but not lose their individuality, right, as artists.
Yeah.
So those were really interesting questions.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay. So you went from there to developing some curriculum and some programs. Did the book? Have we shown the book? Here is your book. Did the book come first, or did what?
No,
how
the
did
book
this progress?
The book came later. So DreamWorks and I parted ways in 2009, 2010, and it's instructive to talk about it because it was a very different process from anything that I had ever encountered in getting fired before, right?
Right.
Because I began to realize, and this is something I think we all have to take a look at, no matter how old we are, we have to kind of do a temperature check about how we're doing, right, in our job.
Yeah. Excellent.
And I began to realize that we were going in different directions.
Okay.
And that in a strange way, I had accomplished what I had set out to do there. And that with where they were going and where I wanted to go, there was no other thing for me to do. And at one point, I actually called up the COO who I reported to, and I sat down with her and I said, look, is there anything left for me to do here? And I talk about this in the book. And it was a really amazing conversation because she looked at me and she kind of had this kind of strange expression on her face. It was very awkward for a second. And she said, I really don't know what to tell you because you've done this amazing job here and we love you, but I don't think there is anything left for you to do here.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating question. And when you think about, people do tend to stay past that point where there's not much left for them to do. And then the boredom sets in and all the discontent and you don't really know why.
Well,
it's a great question to ask.
I mean, I was starting to feel the boredom and starting to feel like, what else am I doing? And I'm not a steady state manager. I'm a project guy. I'm a conquer new territories kind of a person. I get bored easily.
Right.
I have a short attention span. And this kept me going for 6 years. And then it started to wane. And I went to Ann Daly and I said, well, what am I going to do here? And she said, I don't think there's a future. And I said, okay, well, let's figure out how to engineer the exit. And I was heartbroken on a certain level because I would have loved to have stayed working there because it's a great company. And I loved all those people. And I loved the climate and the environment. And it was a real just heart loss to leave that company for all those reasons. But it was time, right? And I had to realize and kind of pull myself up and realize it was time to leave.
Right.
So the focus then became on what I wanted to do, which was to work full-time in education and training, initially working in the entertainment industry exclusively around creativity and technology and education. But I was asked to do a TEDx talk in 2012.
Okay.
And these were people that I had keynoted for previously. And I said to them, what do you want me to talk about? You want me to talk about what's going on? And this was transformation, was the topic of the day.
Okay.
And I said, do you want me to talk about what's been going on in entertainment with the advent of digital and all of the,
right.
changes that have been going on? And they said, you can talk about whatever you want. And for some reason, I think I'd been reading up about how the boomer generation was having trouble recovering from the recession.
Okay.
So this is 2012,
Right.
4 years after 2008. And I thought, what are we going to do? We can't afford to retire. There aren't jobs out there. There's a lot of ageism. What's the prescription? And I thought, well, we can't rely on other people to solve our problems for us. It's not going to happen. We can't just kind of picket in the streets about, well, you should change this.
Yeah.
We have to solve this for ourselves. So I thought, okay, I'm going to take my up and down, tumultuous, topsy-turvy entertainment business career of recovering from all of these firings and what I learned in my psychology program and come up with a proposal, with a framework for this, which is what the talk was about. And people were saying after the talk, hey, that was pretty cool. What are you going to do with this? And I thought, I'm not quite sure. And then people started coming to me to coach around 2014. I started writing about this in Huffington Post and meeting people who had turned their careers around and researching this and starting to write about it. And then 2015 or so, I realized if I'm going to keep going at this, I need to write a book. I need to do it both for myself to really make sure that I know what I'm talking about and have this laid out and really explore this in depth. And also to be able to let people know what it is that they're signing up for, right? And what the opportunities are for them. Because there are a lot of books out there, some great books about people who have reinvented themselves. And there are very few books about how to do it.
Absolutely. Yes, so true. And it is, it's a tough one. I mean, reinventing yourself, especially at that age when you're becoming yourself and who you are at that age, that's really difficult. So some actual instruction and advice is really powerful.
Right. Well, change is hard.
Change is hard.
Right?
Yeah, but change is also the only thing that helps you grow. So,
well, that's the paradox, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to do, but it's the only thing that life is change, right?
Right.
And we spend a lot of time trying to keep that, away.
Yeah, it is interesting because life is just a constant series of changes, and most of them we don't say the change is hard. I mean, a lot of them we're doing them all the time, and we're not saying that, but certain changes are really hard.
Well, I got into trouble early on, being this kind of reinvention advocate with people who would say to me, "You can't advocate for this because it's too hard for people, and you're setting an unreasonable expectation."
Wow. Interesting.
And we see this in the media. There are all these stories about people who have reinvented their lives and they're doing great, and it's an unreasonable expectation
for them,
people.
not me, right?
And and I understand that, and I think that we have done in the media. We have kind of glorified this and put it on a pedestal. But I think there is no alternative, right?
Right.
But to change in one way or another. So I don't define reinvention necessarily as a 180-degree change from what you're doing. You don't have to drop everything and become someone else, right? You can reinvent yourself in your current job, right? And make yourself more relevant, more valuable with a few key tweaks. And that to me qualifies as a reinvention because it's about the mindset. It's about a change in the way you see yourself and the way you provide value. And you can do that in a small way that has revolutionary impact.
Right.
Or you can do it in the 180-degree way if you say, I'm done with this. I've done this for 20 years or 30 years. I'm done. It's time for me to figure something else out.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great point that, it whatever suits you as far as the degree of change it's still change. It's still reinvention, like you say. So it doesn't
one size does not fit all.
No,
right? And we each have the opportunity to create our own reinvention that works for us.
Right. And small changes can go a long way.
Absolutely.
Right? So Yeah. So what is your process? How do you address this?
Well, two headlines for this, which I talk about in the book. The first headline, and I think this is true at any age, is that your next career is already inside you, right?
I love that.
It's not based on someone else's evaluation of your skills and your background. This is an HR approach, and HR, the best HR people do an amazing job, but I think they're working for the company, right? And their attitude and their mindset is a company mindset where they want to put you into a role that benefits the company.
Right.
And if it benefits you, that's great. But primarily, you're serving the man. And I don't think that's really the way to go, particularly in an era where corporate loyalty is, as we know, out the window.
Right.
It's really important that we understand who we are, the value that we can provide, what we love to do, what's going to kind of get us stimulated and excited getting up every morning.
Right.
So that is already inside us. And to the extent that we have perhaps plastered over that through years of going to work every day,
Right.
I offer an opportunity and a way of beginning to express that. And then the second idea, and I think this applies more to people who have been in the workforce for some time, is that in order to create the future, you have to resolve the past. And we all build up a certain amount of baggage over time, right? And the older you are, the more baggage you've got, just the way it goes, right? And having been fired 39% of the time, I have had a lot of baggage that I've had to deal with over the course of those years. And leaving DreamWorks, it all kind of came up. I thought I had resolved it when I lost the company and reinvented myself that time, and it came back around. I had tremendous techniques that I had developed around that and working through it, but the feelings came back. So it's something that recurs, right? You can't expect that you just flip into some new thing and you're a new person and you're never affected by all this. So the career's inside you. You got to resolve the past, and that's what gives you the clear head, the clean slate to start fresh and start workshopping what you can do. So the first 3 steps in my 5 steps are that reconciliation process. And then the final 2 steps are this idea of expressing, where you want to start expressing the new career to yourself and the people around you, right? And whether it is, there's a lot of research involved in terms of, looking around, talking to people, doing a lot of reading, acting as if you're in that role.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, right.
It could be as a side gig. You could start this as a side gig. You could start volunteering. There are lots of ways of kind of getting your feet wet to see if it's right for you. And then the final step is the networking. It's the connecting. It's all about people. You can't manage a career today through resumes and send out resumes and expect to get an interview off of a resume. It's got to be through referrals, because 85% of jobs are filled through referrals, not through resumes.
Right. That's fantastic. So that's your 5-step process. It sounds simple, but it's not when you get into doing it. But I just want to actually just highlight that never did you mention, get your resume together as one of these early steps,
Well, because that's a given. I think, sure, you want to get your resume together because you want to be able to think about what you've done and update it and prioritize it and organize it. But more than your resume, you want a good LinkedIn profile.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. But what I was thinking is more that time that you take to really just think about yourself, to become very aware of who you are and what your strengths are and what you might want, and all of that is I think the thing that people, they don't stop and take that time.
Yes, that
they jump straight into better get my resume. I'm out of a job.
Right.
What in the heck are you going to put on your resume as far as what you want?
Yep. And to that point, the biggest refrain that I have gotten in this process from people is the frustration that they feel where they say, I'm being told, this is for older workers, I'm being told I'm overqualified for the jobs I'm applying to. And I kind of agree with that. overqualified. If you have just come out of a job that you've had for 10 years and you are applying to that same level job, then the employer is going to want you 10 years younger and 10 years cheaper.
It's
right?
not really funny, but yes.
And it's time to upgrade, right? It's time to really take everything that you've learned in that job, plus what you've learned in life,
Right.
and figure out how can you be even more valuable in this next iteration, and take everything that you've done and put it to better use.
Right. And that's a mindset in itself because,
Right.
you know, in that moment where you're out of a job for whatever reason, that fear does set in.
Right.
So it's hard to think beyond that a little bit
Right.
to go to
Right.
that elevated place you're talking about.
Right. And I do want to bring in the ageism question around this question, because I know that people will be listening and they'll go, well, yeah, but they don't like older people. And that's true, you know, and there is a lot of ageism in that process of applying and being rejected. And employers will be very sneaky in getting around the age discrimination law and rejecting you for whatever reason, because you're not a right fit, or you know, whatever that is, or someone better qualified, or whatever the lie is, and it is a lie.
Okay.
When they don't want you because you're over 50. But this goes back to the same question about what kind of value are you representing, right?
Right.
If you are representing yourself as someone who is doing the same thing you've always done and you want a chance to do it again, you're competing against people who are younger and cheaper, who are doing that thing, who are a better fit. You have to overcome that by being absolutely, undeniably the best
Yeah.
and the most strategic, the most self-aware, the most conscious of how the company works and how you can use your maturity and insights and experience to do a much better job than any of those other people who were applying.
I love that. Yeah. So, in your opinion, should you be open about that? Should you address the fact that you know, because of the experience and you know, the maturity, you can go there?
It's a delicate question. I don't think you are served to say something along the lines of, well, do you know how much experience I have? When you were 5 years old, I was already, doing $1 zillion a year. No, no one wants to hear that. Nobody wants to be, told how good you are because how old you are.
Right.
They just want to know that you are going to fill their need, solve their problem in a way that no one else can solve it. So that you blow them away and they go, look, we've got all these people who are coming in who are great, they could do it, but this guy or this woman, who's been around a lot, but oh my God, look, I mean, you got to meet her. You got to meet her. You're going to love her.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
That's what you want, right?
Yeah. So you really have to bring it and you have to have done the background, re-identifying yourself in your own mind before you can do that.
So I'll tell you a story from the book.
Okay.
There's a guy named Dan Getz, who I interview in the book, who was a management executive operator, ran a company, CEO of a small manufacturing company here in the Los Angeles area, family-owned business, got fired, unexpectedly fired, and thought, okay, I'm going to go and get another senior level C-suite kind of job. He was out of work for over a year.
Okay.
And began to realize that what he needed to do was stop trying to fit into these positions. He started going in and interviewing the companies that he was applying to.
Right, okay.
Not interviewing them as a kind of a taskmaster with a checklist, but just really getting interested in who they were, what their problems were, and decoupling from the idea that he wanted a job. And his whole mood shifted. And he became much more enthusiastic about the process. And now he'd been out of work for a year, right? So you got to think he's pretty depressed about this and frustrated and running out of opportunities. But he turned his whole mindset around because he started interviewing these companies and started providing insights and free advice and basically saying, look, I'm really, if you hire me, if you offer me a job, great. I'm just really interested in what you are doing because I'm interested in this whole sector, whatever it was.
Okay.
And his whole attitude changed. And as a result of that, he got a referral to some guy who was working in private equity,
Okay.
who approached him about, would he be interested in working with this private equity group to take over a distressed company and manage it to the sale?
That's great.
Never thought about this in his life, that this would be a possibility.
Right.
And he said, sure. He did this, opened up a whole new business for him, all sorts of new contacts. What he ended up doing, he never thought of himself as a business owner before. He was always the hired gun.
Right.
All of a sudden he's thinking, I could do this and I could have my own company. So he went out, he actually found a different private equity group and partnered with them, and they went and they bought a company together. He's now like a 20, 30% owner, and he runs this company, moved from LA to Oregon. He completely changed his life around.
Love it. Yeah.
And here he is, all because he started coming in with a different attitude, a service-based attitude, right, towards the interviews that he was on.
That's a fantastic story. Yeah, there are so many takeaways there. I mean, about
amazing.
Everything from being open to coming in with the right mindset and the right attitude. And so when you're, maybe this will, come a little more from your psychology background. But so what do you do? We talked a little before the show about the feelings of loss that you have when you lose a job and how real they are, and how difficult they can be to manage. So when you're going in after a year of not having found a job and you're you're shifting your mindset, what are you doing with all of those feelings that you're having about, how desperate you are really to land something? Right.
Well, I would hope that you would do this before it's been 12 months.
Right.
And I think, Dan Getz's story aside, I think that we were talking about this before, the big surprise for me as a coach was really understanding the depth of people's attachment to the jobs that they are leaving, even if it's their decision to leave. Even if they decide that they're going to take early retirement or whatever they're going to do.
Right.
However they leave the job, there is often this unexpected sense of loss and attachment to the routine, to the location, to the people. The people is a huge loss. It is on the level of death and divorce, to walk away from a job.
Right.
So it is really important, again, to go back to this idea of resolution, of taking care of the baggage, of really dealing with your feelings, whether you do this on your own, family, friends, go into counseling. It's really, really important to be able to free yourself from the weight of that, because you are bringing that into every meeting. And you are painting every potential picture with the reference point of the job that you've left. Is it as good as?
Right.
And are the people? Is the culture? And you're trying to create something that you can't create. You can't recreate that job that you've lost. You have to enter into the new situation with an open mindset. The values that you bring to that decision are entirely valid. And you may learn a lot about your values by what it is that you miss about that job.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you have to bring that job with you into the next job. You can't, right? You have to start fresh. So this reconciliation process, the sooner you can start it, and the sooner you can begin to free yourself of the job that you've left, the sooner you're going to be able to open up to new opportunities that you will not see unless you do this work.
Right.
And that was one of Dan's things, I think, in his story, that he was going for this particular job set. And when the private equity thing happened, it was completely out of the blue.
Right.
But had he done this work, perhaps, earlier on, he might have had that as one of the touch points that he could have explored.
Right. Yeah, it's really it's fascinating to see how narrowly we think about ourselves, actually.
Right. I think that's a very, very big issue, and part of the process that I advocate, and one thing which I will just recommend to your listeners right now is to start a journal.
Mm-hmm. Good. I always say that too.
Right. I mean, so there's I've stolen this quite freely from a book called The Artist's Way, which you're familiar with, Julia Cameron, which I read, 20, 30 years ago. And her idea of the morning pages, I think, is really revolutionary. And the idea basically is that if you have creative block, writer's block, artist block, whatever kind of creative block, you write this daily journal as an opportunity to talk about anything but the work that you are having problems doing, right? And that process of airing out all of these random thoughts and the frustrations, and even the idea of a blank page where you write about the fact that you have nothing to write about, starts to tap into your unconscious mind and your inspiration. Right. So I did this after my startup blew up, and I have no idea what I'm going to do. And I would get up about a half hour early, and I had a stationary bike in the garage, and I would go into the garage and I would get on the bike, and I had a little kind of easel set up on the handlebars, and I would write.
Wow, while you're biking.
While I'm biking, because I want to get the energy going.
Yeah.
And I did some amazing transformational work in those morning writing sessions. Yeah. So I advocate that people do this the moment they lose a job. Go out, buy a fresh new little Moleskine, 6x8 notebook, and start writing 20 minutes a day in that journal. Yeah. And do it all in one sitting. Hand write it, don't type it, and do it at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, but don't let yourself be interrupted. Right. Don't do this as just one other thing that you're doing. Make this a ritual.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, and if you do it early in the morning like that, it sets your whole day up to just receive so many, so many better things than if you don't do it.
Wisdom. You get wisdom out of this. You really do. You all of a sudden realize, oh my God, this is, you start thinking about things you'd never thought of before, or things you haven't thought about in years. Right. People that you need to reconnect with who are the perfect connection for you right now. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that is great advice. And
I'm glad we got to the journal.
Every client I work with, I give them a journal, and some of them you have to talk them into doing it a little more than others, but it's pretty magical. And I've been doing it my whole life, but I do have times when I stop, and then I realize how what a bad idea that has been to stop whenever I do.
Let's talk about the people who don't like to write. Let's talk about the people who are really resistant. And I'm sure there are people who are listening to this who are going, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. Right. And set aside the fact that that's a limiting belief right there. But having said that, any kind of ritual, any kind of self-care ritual that you're willing to get into at this point, if you're in that career transition, is really vital. Something different, something new, something ritualized. It might be as simple as you walk around the block with the dog every morning at 6 a.m. Right? It could be exercise. It could be some kind of breakfast ritual that you do, where you decide you're going to have a protein shake every morning, or whatever it is that you're going to do. But make it a ritual, because if you do that and you create this time for yourself, you will allow the self-reflective process to begin to take hold. And as you're doing this, remember that I'm advocating the journal. And maybe by doing this pre-ritual, you might say one day, well, maybe I could do the journal. Maybe I can commit to 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is. Make it a gradual process of self-care, self-nurturing, self-discovery, because that is what's going to actually impact your success at creating this next phase of your career. As counterintuitive as that might be
Right.
for a lot of people who go, well, yeah, but what does it have to do with resume and getting out there and networking and all? This is the precursor, the preamble that puts your mind in the right frame to be successful at that next step.
Yes, absolutely. And it is a hard time. And so, that self-care is critical. And, you don't have the structure of going into a workplace and everything else anymore. You've got to create your own structure, and it's got to start with you and making sure that your energy is up so that you can even tackle this stuff.
I mean, we're getting to another area here, but this whole question of structure, and particularly today when business is so kind of spread out and flexible, and where we don't have the same kind of office hours that we need to adhere to. And I think for older people, this is who are used to kind of 9 to 5, or in the film business 9 to 9. It's disconcerting to have that level of self-responsibility around work. So it's even more important to have those self-care rituals in place, because you have to be more disciplined.
Yes, absolutely. And that goes for anybody who's not in a structured situation. Even I've known people who have retired, my dad included, and it was kind of like, before he knew it every day, it was 4 o'clock. And I mean, he wasn't getting a lot out of his days because he'd lost the structure and he needed to impose his own. But business owners, same thing. Entrepreneurs trying to create their own structure, that's a big, big challenge. So, couldn't agree with you more about starting your morning with some kind of rituals like that. And I have to remind, I know it. What you know doesn't necessarily trigger you to do things. So we talk about that a lot with respect to money. But so knowing is one thing. Setting up the ritual and making sure that you have the discipline and you do it is another. Yikes, the time is going fast. I wanted to talk a little about the idea of not going back into a corporate environment or getting a job and starting off on your own.
Sure. Well, I think it's about mindset, again, as is everything, and this entrepreneurial mindset idea. So I like to say that regardless of whether you are a W-2 employee or a 1099 contractor, at the end of the day, you want to think of yourself as a consultant providing value to a client versus an employee working under the supervision of a boss. Because that kind of describes the world that we live in today anyway. But I think also as we get older, we know more, More is expected of us because we have more experience, we know more. So it becomes about differentiation. What is the way that we can productize our knowledge and experience and our offering to be of greater value? Because that's what's going to be demanded of us. Again, they can hire people who are younger and cheaper to just, execute. This is not about executing. This is really about not just figuring out what problems to solve. It's really also what questions to ask. A lot of people just don't know what the questions are. Right? And I think a lot of the advantages of older people comes through this instantaneous awareness that we have looking at a situation about, okay, well, here's the problem. Don't you realize what the problem is? And this is called just thinking in neurological circles. And, I see this with, certainly I've experienced this a lot, and I'm sure you have, and older people, you're in a meeting, everyone's talking about a problem, and you see the answer right there, and you say, well, here's the answer. And everyone goes, how did you figure that out? And it just seems obvious to you. Well, it's because, the neural pathways, you've done this over and over and over again in this or a different kind of a situation. You just know what the answer is because you've been there, right? That's valuable, right? That's a very, very valuable asset that experienced workers have that should be part of this niche value proposition that you need to put together for yourself in pulling out of this transition.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking, you can do this yourself, but getting some mentorship or some support in this particular area is, I think, really important.
Right. Well, the second step in my 5 steps is I call listening, which is really going out and tapping the close friends, colleagues, ex-bosses, if you feel comfortable doing this,
Right.
to kind of sit down and say, look, give me some really straight feedback here. Don't sugarcoat this. What am I good at? Where are the challenges? What do you recommend? Let's talk about this.
Right.
And if you do this, and I've worked this with clients, and people come back in after doing this for a couple of weeks and they go, oh my God, this was more amazing than I expected. You start to get a sense of what the patterns are.
Right.
People will tell you what you fear is true, but also they will confirm, what you are proud of, right? So it's a complete win-win.
Right.
To be able to go in and get the support you need and the signposts from your trusted network. And then ultimately, in terms of the networking process that you want to do, this group can be your board of directors.
Right.
These are the people who become your home team
Right.
in the process of going out there and making strategic decisions about, okay, who should I be targeting? What are the companies? How does this? Let me run this product idea by you. Let me run this elevator pitch by you.
Right.
Take a look at my LinkedIn profile. Do you think that properly represents who I am?
Right. Yeah, that's fantastic. So, that really deep dive into your value, your values that you care about, and also your value as a person who can serve. So, yeah, wow, that's really good. So we don't have much time left. We can talk about so many things. Networking comes up a lot as we discussed. The key way to move yourself forward, as opposed to, like you were saying earlier, sitting at your computer and delivering resumes into the online void.
Yes, network online and in person, and always be giving. Networking is first a process of being of service to others. And through that process, you will receive.
Right.
It's very metaphysical, but it's really the way it works.
Yeah.
And it really is about making introductions to people, providing referrals, information, tips and tricks. And we live in an amazing time to be able to, each of us, act as a publisher of information.
Right.
And to use social media as a way of furthering our brand, furthering our thought leadership, and establishing rapport and connections with people based on our opinions and our values and the way we express them. And how much time do we have? So there's a guy I want to talk about, I talk about in the book, who set himself up as a financial advisor from scratch. Had never been in the financial services business. He was an industrial salesman forever, but he had a knack for investing, and he started a blog. And he started to share his opinions on finance. And what happened was people would read his blog to understand, say, 6 months ago, what was he saying about the market?
Okay.
Well, it's on the record. If they agreed with him, if they felt that he was being smart, it gave them a reason to sign up with him today.
Okay.
Right? So you build your reputation through what you can publish. So for all of us, that's a great opportunity. And I would say if you're between jobs, if you're in a career transition, you figured out what the niches that you want to focus on, start writing about it, start blogging about it, start sharing about it on social media. Find posts and comment on other people's posts and articles that are on that topic so that you can start developing a sense of fluency about it.
That's a great tip to wrap up on. There's a lot more to talk about, so I might be begging you to come back one of these days. But okay. So we've spent the last 50 minutes with John Tarnoff, and please buy his book here, How to Create Your Dream Career Over 50. It is about dream careers over 50, but the principles apply to really anybody.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of great information for people of any age.
And we were all going to be 50 at one point or another.
That's right. So prepare now. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And For those of you listening, thank you for joining us today. We are here on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock, and we are here talking about how to create wonderful careers, create them yourself, that are fulfilling, fun, and financially prosperous. So please let people know about the show, share the show after you see it today, and please visit me at limitfreelife.com. Okay, have a great week.
Talk radio will actually educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.